I grew up in a really safe city in the Midwest, in an even safer neighborhood. It was sort of set back in the woods, secluded from the main part of the town. I haven't had a lot of creepy encounters in my life, so this is pretty much the most afraid I've ever been. I was 14 at the time, and had just passed a babysitting essentials course at the rec. My neighborhood was very close-knit. All the kids on my street played together, and because of my 2 younger brothers, I would soon become the automatic babysitter for the 3 families we lived closest to. I'd looked after my brothers for short amounts of time, but this was my first job as a real babysitter, watching the 2 grade school-age children who lived across the street. They were family friends. Their parents promised that they would be back by 11 p.m., and I knew that my parents were home and ready to step in if I needed anything, so I was a little nervous, but felt like I had things under control. The kids were a novice babysitter's dream. They'd been trained that they're only allowed to choose 1 treat each before bed, and actually refused my offer to let them finish the show we were watching because it was their bedtime, and they still needed to brush their teeth first. I was taken back, but it made my job super easy, so I tucked them in and headed back downstairs to watch TV until their parents returned. The mom is an interior designer, so their house is spacious and absolutely beautiful. Their living room is at the back of the house, with floor-to-ceiling windows, and great views of the woods in their backyard. The couch is set up with its back to those windows, and I was watching TV with their elderly white lab, Alex. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something large brush past the window behind me. I thought it might just be a deer, but I was 14 and alone, and I have an active imagination, so I began to feel uneasy and pretty on edge. The parents weren't due back for another 2 hours, so I walked into the kitchen to call my mom and dad for reassurance. Alex followed me. Their kitchen faces the living room, with the house phone on the counter. Standing at the counter dialing my parents, I had a clear view through the broad archway into the living room, and out of those enormous windows into the backyard. Alex laid down at my feet as I stood next to the counter and told my mom that I thought I'd seen something out of the window. Hearing her voice was as comforting and reassuring as I thought it would be, so I told her that I didn't need Dad to come over, and that I'd call her if I needed anything at all. I hung up the phone and sat down on the floor to rub Alex's ears and belly for a few minutes, still kind of wary of the living room. After sitting on the couch not too long before I sat down, I caught a glimpse of something outside through the large windows. I looked harder, past the glare of the TV, and noticed a tiny light bobbing around in the woods. Probably just a neighbor, I thought. But as I watched, the light seemed to be moving in what was undeniably my direction. My whole body froze, and I stared as the light continued to get closer to the living room windows, and at some point, I realized, with complete and paralyzing horror, the light had grown large enough that the source was now right outside of the house. The beam swung from one side of the living room to the other, and then settled directly on my face. I don't even think I squinted in the bright light as it was shone through the window into my eyes. I was too startled. Alex snoozed on, placid in his old age, and entirely unaware that my heart had pretty much stopped beating. The light moved again, this time swinging away to illuminate a face from underneath. I saw dark eye sockets and the glowing curves of someone's cheeks, but the face's details were lost in the harsh angle of the flashlight's beam. At this point, I was trying with all my might to scream, or to move my fingers enough to dial 911, or to move out of view of the window. Literally anything would have been better than sitting there with my mouth open and tears in my eyes. But I'd never felt this kind of icy terror before, and was completely immobilized by it. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion, and I was totally powerless. The light swung around to point at me, then quickly moved back underneath the horrible face outside. It repeated this pattern once or twice, and then it suddenly disappeared. The flashlight had been turned off, and for whatever reason, that was enough to finally let me move again. I quickly stood and hit dial, about to call 911, as I mentally debated whether to lock myself in the master bedroom with the children or just grab them and try to run out of the front door to my parents' house. My certification class had not prepared me for this. Before I even made it halfway down the hallway to grab the kids, I heard a loud boom and felt my gut leap into my throat. It sounded to be coming from the garage, but I remembered closing it earlier, so my mind raced as I tried to picture where the sound was coming from. I worked up the courage to peek my head into the garage, just to make sure it was closed, and thankfully, it was. The light from the kitchen provided just enough light to see a hammer on the father's toolkit, so I quickly grabbed it and ran back inside, locking the door behind me. Now that I had a weapon, I felt a bit safer until that quickly changed when someone began pounding on the front door. The owners installed a Ring doorbell security system, so they'd be able to access the video footage and talk to whoever was at the front door. I frantically called their parents, praying that they'd answer as the pounding on the door continued. They finally picked up, and I explained our situation, telling them to check the video footage. Although it was hard to hear the conversation with the father and the person at the front door over the phone, I was able to catch some of the things they were saying. He told me to go open the front door. He explained how it was our neighbor who had to borrow some of our spices since his wife was trying to make a recipe. I had a million questions swirling through my mind as I heard this. None of it made sense. Why would the neighbor be spying on us and pounding on the door for spices? It didn't add up, and I was reluctant in doing so. That was when their mother took the phone back. "Look, I know you're scared right now, but you need to trust us and open that door right now. Please." Her voice strained with a tone that made it feel strangely genuine, and despite my worries, I knew I trusted her and started making my way to the front door. My whole body was shaking, but I kept reassuring myself it would be okay, even though it felt like the opposite. As I opened the door, a man dressed in a flannel and a pair of jeans came in and quickly introduced himself. He ran straight to the door leading into the house from the garage and made sure it was locked. He then asked me if I could borrow my phone, since I was still on the line with the children's parents. Given my vulnerability and total confusion, I handed him the phone and he began talking to the parents. After a minute or so, he concluded the conversation by saying, "Okay, you called them, right? Okay, good, bye." With the kids crying in the bedroom and a random man I'd never seen before holding my phone beside me who was previously pounding on the door, I was literally convinced that I was in some sort of dream. Just before I was about to pinch myself, the supposed neighbor quietly told me that there was a person trying to break in and he was going to keep us safe. He revealed a gun in his waistband and told me everything was going to be okay and the police were on their way. Well, fast forward to the next day, I finally learned what happened. Around 8:45 that night, the neighbor who came over was letting his dog out when he spotted a flashlight in the backyard. It was certainly out of the ordinary, so he continued to monitor it through the window once he got back inside. He watched as it approached the windows facing the back of the house and began looking in. Once he had a closer view, he could tell that it was a man, but was unable to make out the face. He watched as he started making his way around the house, in between the house I was babysitting in and the neighbor's house. He watched as he entered the side door of the garage, which is when I must have heard the booming sound. I can't even explain how lucky I am that I didn't get killed that night. When I opened the door to the garage to make sure it was shut and grabbed the hammer, the man was inside the dark garage with me the entire time, watching me from the darkness. It all makes sense to me now, like why the neighbor was frantically pounding on the door and how the parents told me he was there to grab spices. They knew that if they told us what was really happening, the kids, including myself, would have lost all composure. The police found the man who broke into the garage that night, and he tried attacking them. Thankfully, he was unsuccessful, and they arrested him on the spot. He was found to be in a drug-induced psychosis. I really look at life differently now, realizing that at any minute, it could be taken away. If it wasn't for that neighbor, I might not even be here telling this story today. After much wavering and second-guessing, I finally bit the bullet and returned to graduate school last fall. I'm sure several of you know how difficult it is to juggle a rigorous PhD program and a full-time job. I was going to need a small source of income, but wanted something that would allow my school to be my first priority. As luck would have it, a good friend of mine knew a family in desperate need of a quality babysitter. Their current sitter had recently graduated high school and was heading out of state for college. Initially, I felt a little odd accepting work as a babysitter. After all, I was in my mid-20s, a PhD student, and engaged to be married. But the hours were flexible, the money was fantastic, and I could anticipate a great deal of solid study hours after the toddler was sleeping soundly. To be quite honest, it was smooth sailing from the start. The family was overwhelmingly generous with their money, and their 3-year-old daughter, Gianna, was quite well behaved, even in all of her mischievous toddler glory. Over the next few months, I found myself up there several times a week, mostly relieving the mother, Marie, in the afternoons, so she could run errands and catch a coffee break. I occasionally sat on Saturdays, so the parents could enjoy date night to the movies. I wasn't especially fond of the weekend night shifts, especially because the family lived in a large home, high up in the mountains, surrounded by acres and acres of trees. During the day, their heavily wooded property was serene and majestic, but once darkness fell, it was eerie in its silence. I tried to keep my mind off of the creepy woods surrounding me outside by working on my laptop or burying my nose in a textbook. Everything changed this past February. It was an especially cold Saturday evening, and I was due to babysit around 7 that night. Marie's husband, Michael, was out of town on business, and she was attending her best friend's birthday get-together that evening. Armed with a backpack of heavy reading, I had my fiancé drop me off on his way to the store. The night was mellow. I heated up some frozen pizza, worked on schoolwork, and had the kids in bed by 8. I had an exam the following Tuesday, and admittedly had a lot of studying to conquer. My fiancé arrived around 9:50, about 10 minutes before I was expecting Marie to return home. Right at 10, we heard footsteps on the wraparound deck, and noticed Marie making her way to the front door. I remember finding it funny that I had been concentrating so hard, I didn't even hear her car pull in. My fiancé and I exchanged a knowing glance as Marie made her way into the house and immediately walked straight upstairs. It appeared she might have had one glass of wine too many that evening because she is usually very social and polite. I began to gather my things as my fiancé continued a game of solitaire on his phone. By the time we got down to the driveway, my fiancé and I both had baffled looks on our faces. Marie stood in the window, smiling down at us, waving her hand back and forth. I gave a short nod and waved, keeping my eyes on the gravel. We walked down the empty driveway towards the street, since Marie parks her car in the garage. "I'm not the only person who found that whole thing weird, right?" my fiancé asked. "Oh, relax. She was probably just tipsy," I said, closing the passenger side door. We began our trek down the winding roads, after a long night of babysitting. The drive from their house to the freeway was dark, lined with redwoods and deer, which I usually quite enjoyed. Then it hit me. I pawed at the handle of my purse, and for the first time, I noticed the bag's weight. I'd forgotten my textbook. Reluctant to turn around when we had already been driving for so long, I made amends with the fact that I absolutely needed that textbook if I had any chance of passing my exam. My fiancé let out a groan as he swung the wheel, turning back the way we came. As we made our way to the deck, I saw the burgundy spine of my textbook on the couch through the sliding glass door. I continued on to the front door and knocked on it. There was no answer. I knocked again and then tried the door handle, which was unlocked. We made our way into the house, making sure to keep our footsteps quiet. "Sorry, it's just me. I forgot my book," I said, trying to keep my voice down. My fiancé was a few steps behind me, peeking around the corner. As I stood at the bottom of the steps, I could see that all the lights were still on upstairs. I yelled, "Hey, it's me. You still awake?" There was complete silence. We walked towards the kitchen, and I noticed the answering machine was blinking. I hadn't noticed it before I left. There hadn't been any phone calls that night. I'm not exactly sure what compelled me to push play on that recorder, especially when, for all I knew, Marie and her daughter were both asleep. My fingers seemed to hover over that button for a mere second before I pushed it in. What I heard on that recording has never left me. The timestamp of the message was 10:14. We left the house at 10:05. "Hey sweetie, it's Mom. There's some kind of holdup on the highway here, maybe an accident or something. I'll probably be home about a half hour later than expected." I looked at my fiancé and my heart sank. My eyes flooded with tears. "Gianna?" I managed to sputter. My fiancé disappeared up the staircase, taking multiple steps at a time. After a painfully long minute, he sauntered down the stairs, much slower than he had ascended them. "Gianna's fine, sleeping soundly," he said, without emotion. I opened the garage, and sure enough, her car was not there. We searched every square inch of the house, and it was empty, except for us and her daughter. We went back into the living room, where we sat in silence, until Marie pulled up the driveway. She seemed exhausted, glad to be home, and off of the congested road. She chattered on about her evening, wrote me a check with a generous tip, thanked me for my patience, and smiled. We stumbled down to our car in a daze, still shocked and shook up from the night. I never had the heart to tell her what had happened that evening. I ended up canceling my next 2 shifts, faking a sickness. I finally emailed Marie, telling her that my program was getting especially intense, and that I didn't think I could continue babysitting for them. She bought the story, and now I'm free. free from the house that I let a complete stranger stay, alone with her daughter. I'm a female, and this story took place 3 years ago, when I was 16. When I was in high school, I babysat on the odd occasion for a family I'd known since I was pretty young. They were great, really laid back, and it was the easiest babysitting job in the world because the kids would usually be in bed before I got there and always slept really well. It had been about a year since I'd babysat for them. At that time, they had a new baby who was about 6 months old, so on this occasion, it was me, the baby, and the 3 little kids. I should really mention, before anything, that their house was completely amazing. It wasn't the flashiest from the outside, but it was huge, and although it was in a suburban street, it was positioned on a hill. So from the master bedroom upstairs, you could look out over the whole city. They had tons of CDs, which back then was really exciting for me. The kitchen was always full, and the whole place was decorated like an amazing art gallery, brilliantly designed and very spacious. They always had interesting stuff around too. That night, I noticed in the front room, amongst the kids' stuff, that there was a fake samurai sword. I remember laughing at it, thinking it looked too real to be a toy, and I waved it around a bit. It didn't surprise me though. They were really interesting people, and I always found unordinary things that I liked. The layout of the house was cool too. The front door opened almost directly into the living room, and off to the side, there was a giant spiral staircase leading upstairs to the bedrooms. The living room was fantastic, with tall windows overlooking the front garden and almost the entire street. The middle part of the house was completely open plan, with the kitchen and dining room spread out for what seemed like miles. Near the back of the house, they even had a small study room, which was more like a reading nook. From memory, it was just an armchair and 2 walls of books. My parents dropped me off around 8:30, and the mom and dad left soon after, telling me the kids were fast asleep, and that if I had any problems with the baby, I could wake their oldest daughter, who was good at settling him and would help me if I needed it. I remember being comforted by that, because I knew virtually nothing about babies. I didn't need to, in the end, because the kids slept fine. But the important thing is that I felt safe and at ease. They told me they would be back around 1 a.m. and to call if I needed anything. I wasn't worried. I'd done this countless times before, and even though it was a cold night with a harsh wind, I knew this house, and I knew nothing would happen. I felt completely at home. I felt so safe, actually, that when I had trouble locking the screen door after they'd gone, I didn't stress too much about it. I thought maybe it was jammed. I didn't have a key to the front door, and usually the screen door shut just fine. They lived in a good neighborhood though, and it didn't occur to me at the time that it was anything to worry about. I quickly forgot about it, and went to the study room to read, after quickly peeking in on the kids. I lost track of time for a while. I didn't have a phone when I was 16, and there was no clock in the reading nook. I was totally lost in a book, and before I knew it, a couple hours had gone by. But the passing of time was not what woke me from my reading stupor. I'd been deep in the book, but the eerie sounds of the gusting wind made a howling noise and drew my attention away from the book. I don't know why, but the noises gave me an unsettling feeling in my stomach, and I became a little paranoid. I thought, as I stared at the books on the walls, that maybe I'd just been sitting too long. So I got up and slowly wandered into the kitchen, with the intent of checking on the kids and then maybe watching some TV. The front living room was in darkness, and as I stepped into it on my way to the bedrooms, something stopped me dead in my tracks. With the light of the kitchen illuminating me from behind, I stood paralyzed by the sight of a man standing in the front garden. He didn't move, and I didn't either. I could see that he had shut the garden gate behind him, and from his position in the garden, it was clear he'd been walking towards the door, the same front door I couldn't get locked. I didn't know what to do, as the immediate terror overwhelmed me. I had no weapon, the door was unlocked, and I couldn't run because the kids were sleeping upstairs. He was huge, and I was small. He had a perfectly visible view of me, as his shadowy outline watched from the darkness. Dressed in all black, I've never seen anything more terrifying in my life. I knew if I didn't do something, he would come inside and get us. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted the fake samurai sword, and very slowly, bending down slightly, but not taking my eyes off of the figure in the garden, I picked it up and raised it in the air, letting him know I was armed. I don't know why, but I couldn't think of anything else. He stood there perfectly still, until he started walking right up to the screen door. My entire body was shaking, but I tried so hard to remain calm on the outside, even though every part of me wanted to scream and run. He had this blank, cold stare in his face, almost like a robot. I don't think he blinked once, as I watched his eyes staring dead center on me. This standoff felt like it lasted forever. Eventually, he turned and slowly walked towards the gate and walked away down the street. I stood there for a long time, watching him walk away, and then I ran to the front door and leaned against it, forcing it shut. I was 16, and I was stupid, so I never called anyone. I didn't even mention anything when my parents came to pick me up. I never told anyone. I thought everyone would blame me for putting the kids in danger, or the guy would somehow find out and come after me. The family today is fine, and nothing ever happened to them or their house after that night. But I always have been thankful for that moment of intense dread that caused me to leave the study, because if I hadn't, I don't even let myself think of how differently that night would have gone.